Hello, Melissa. Welcome back to the Brave Writer podcast.
Hi, Julie. Good to see you.
Good to see you. This is the podcast that, what does it do?
It provides professional development for parent educators.
Thank you. I love that. That's exactly it.
I love that you came up with that, Julie, because I love that we're thinking our way through what this role is, this practice that we all embraced of becoming parent educators. It's unique.
Yes. And honestly, it's under attack pretty much everywhere. Whenever I go online, there's somebody who makes some, unilateral statement saying that there is absolutely no way any single parent in the entire universe has the capacity to teach a child anything. Only trained teachers can teach them. And of course, we have evidence that that's not true.
It's so wild to me. I feel like those were the conversations we were having in like 2002
or 1990, honestly.
Yeah.
And what is strange to me is that we have the evidence. Like, it's not like homeschooling just started last year. People have been doing it for 50 years. Universities literally have criteria for how homeschooled students can apply to go to college. If they're failing so hard, why are they admitting anyone to college?
That's right. When my oldest applied to Cal Poly, which is a tough school to get into.
Totally.
We found out kind of after the fact, after she had submitted, that there was supposed to also be an SAT subject test, but they waived it based on her scores and her transcript.
I find it annoying, but it sort of props up today's topic, because when we think about home education, we're creating or casting a vision for what we think parenting and education will look like in our families' lives. And we're taking responsibility for creating that. We're not saying my child will go to school and I will support the PTA or the PTO and we will follow the lead of the teacher. We're saying, hey, they're going to spend all their time in the same house they've been in since they were born, or apartment or farm home or yurt, wherever you live. But they're going to stay in the house. They're not going to get on the bus. And you are going to be the one to create these experiences that what we hope those experiences will produce is some kind of thriving outcome when they're an adult. Somebody asked today online, how do you define success as a parent? And I started to respond to it and then realized I don't really believe in either of those words going together. The objective is not success. The objective of parenting is love. And so success is a weird metric because now you're putting pressure and responsibility on your child to live up to some vision that you hold of them in the future to reward you for the investment of time you've made in their lives. But that is not a sustainable way to raise a child.
Right.
Love is, though, because it's flexible. It doesn't have any metrics tied to it except experience. And experience is what undergirds the parent-child relationship.
The idea of success implies that there's some static or concrete version of future. And that doesn't exist.
Well, and we see it happen all the time in homeschool, right? We see it in homeschool. Parents wanting to prove that their kids have learned a certain amount of information or studied a certain number of instruments or have excelled at, select soccer. Like, we see parents measuring their effectiveness by what we can measure, right? So academics, musical or artistic talent, athletic prowess, those seem to be ways parents sort of validate to themselves they're doing a good job, whether that's helping with homework or designing the curriculum from scratch. When you get to be our ages, however, where our kids are grown, those metrics really drop away. And what we wind up with is, do I even have a relationship with my child?
Right.
Success at our age is, does my child want to go out to lunch with me? Is my child interested in my experience of living at this age, not just using me as a babysitter or using me as a fixture at a wedding, right? So the metric for what it means to be an effective parent educator, or even just an effective parent, ultimately cannot rest on the performance of a child, or they take that pressure on And for a lot of kids, that ends up being a source of pain and estrangement between child and parent.
I'm thinking about this notion of what it is to be an effective parent or educator in the context of if your kids go to school and they have many, many different educators over a life. That sort of spreads out responsibility so that if somebody's life doesn't turn out rosy, everyone involved can kind of say, well, it wasn't due to choices I made, right?
Oh, 100%, right? We can say it was peer pressure. We can say it was a teacher at school. We can say that it had something to do with, the church that we were a part of or the temple that we attended. There is a way to sort of diffuse responsibility, but ultimately, every single activity, every school decision, every moment of a child's life is under the responsible care of their parents. So even if you can say, oh, well, Mrs. Hanson was not a good teacher. Did you intervene? Were you there to support them? Did you know about the problems? Did your child feel free to tell you? Like it all kind of funnels back to you ultimately.
That's right. But there are more variables, which means you can acknowledge that you have less control over outcomes. And I think that concept of outcomes is where things can get really shaky for homeschoolers. Because we're trying to do this thing that's about enjoying the journey, right? It's about process, not product. We try not to be as much focused on outcomes. We're focusing on, as you said, relationships and skills or preserving a zest for learning, right? It's not outcome based. And yet there's this implied notion of outcome. And it has perhaps with homeschooling fewer variables. You're the constant as the parent.
Yes. That really does sum up what we wanted to talk about today. So let me just sort of set the table. We want to talk about this experience of endings. When you get to let's say the end of the years before kindergarten, and now your child is starting school sort of officially. You get to the end of elementary school and you're embarking now on more rigorous learning, the kind that might be junior high. And then, oh my goodness, I always say the re-upping moment for high school. You're like, I really don't know how to do high school. And high school becomes its own brand new experience as you leave behind what seemed simpler and more straightforward. That does not stop. That's part of what drew us to this topic today. How do we deal with this notion that we are responsible for preparing our children to enter a world that is 20 years in the future, 10 years in the future, 3 years in the future? And what does that even mean? Is the preparation around actual academics, mastering AP calculus, getting into a good college? Is it around creativity, critical thinking, and resourcefulness? Is it around the ability to navigate and create powerful and positive relationships, nurturing and loving ones that provide support and companionship? What are we preparing our kids for, and what does it mean to us at each stage of the journey? So that's a little bit what we want to talk about today.
I think that it's a big ask of ourselves because the answer to the questions that you just posed rhetorically is, well, I want all those things. I want all those things.
Yes.
I want them to possess skills and knowledge that enables them to live comfortably in an uncertain world. And I want strong relationships. And I want them to have grit, and I want them to be able to cope and adapt and, create, right?
And live independently and pay their bills.
Right. Contribute, right?
Yes.
To society.
Yes.
It is a huge ask. And I think that is the ask of all parents for their children is, oh yeah, I want all those things. And then it's in a state of complete unpredictability of circumstances.
Part of what we're facing right now is that the job market feels more precarious than I have experienced it in a while. Now, my kids were kind of graduating from college when we had the economic collapse in 2008. And so jobs were really hard to come by. I remember when I graduated in 1979 from high school and then 83 in college, the job market was really flat. People were having a really hard time becoming employable and employed. but it was more focused on the economy. What's happening right now is we're seeing a real transformation in what jobs will even be available and what sorts of jobs our kids ought to prepare themselves to hold. Are you finding that? My kids are a little older, so they've gone to grad school and kind of picked their paths. And, 3 of the 5 absolutely have chosen careers that are kind of independent of this AI move. But I'm curious, your kids are coming up behind mine. How is it from your perspective?
Because my kids have such an age spread, my oldest is 30, my youngest is 17, I've really seen that shift occur between when my oldest graduated from college. That was the height of the STEM period. And jobs in tech were where the jobs were. And everybody was kind of pivoting to, and those of us who were real humanities people were like, oh boy, have I done enough to
Yes.
prepare my kids for jobs in STEM? And now the jobs in tech are diminishing.
Yeah.
And we're all talking about the trades. And am I doing enough to keep doors open to those kind of jobs for my kids? And I noticed that shift coming right about the time my third kid was considering college. So my younger set are much more focused on skills with their hands and very, very focused on not incurring student loan debt.
Yes. Oh my God. That's
Which
so
does
true. Yes.
affect your options for what kind of it, your humanities education can involve a lot of debt. And if you're avoiding that or you're going an alternate route, that does shift. So this picture of what jobs am I even working to prepare them for, or how do I help all the doors stay open, which has been my goal the whole time, to make sure doors are open to them in their adulthood. I feel like I have less control. I second guess more than I did 10 years ago.
Part of what I think is occurring is that because we're in sort of a revolution that doesn't have a very clear path, we're being fed sometimes a utopian vision, like AI will take over everything and no one will work and we'll all just, walk to the store and take what we need. I mean, I don't know. That's one of the visions I heard on a podcast. And then the other is this idea, of course, that AI will take over and a, percentage of the population will be without useful work and we will really fall into some kind of depression. So when I look at raising kids in an environment like that, one of the things that I always have to do for myself is stay focused on the values that were underlying my education rather than preparing my kids for specific fields. Like we can't be chasing computer programming and making a kid who's not interested in computers learn to computer program, right? Same with AI, same with whatever. What we want to do is help our kids identify what gives them a sense of purpose and meaning in life, not just how to make money, not just how to cut a check and pay for the bills, because ultimately the job market is fluctuating. I always love to mention that when I graduated from college, my career wasn't even a possibility. There were no computers yet. There was no online internet yet. And my initial work that I did as a freelance writer all came through personal networking and not through any kind of job hire. But I knew very early on that writing was something that was really important to me. And I kept honing that skill. Now, I was fortunate early on. I was a missionary and I had a source of income. So that was a different path, right, to getting to where I wound up. But having some faith that your kids can be well prepared in both how to learn, how to be self-motivated, and what they value most seems really critical. What do you think about that, Melissa?
Yeah. Okay. I really appreciate this framing of it in terms of what are my core values as a parent educator.
Yes.
That's really helpful to come back to. And it relates to the question you posed a little bit ago about this notion of endings. They get older and a certain season of our lives with them close and a new season begins. And that is our experience over and over and over as parents, right? And I would say maybe even more accelerated or intensified in ways as parent educators. We know that there's a time when this is going to be the last time I ever do whatever geometry with one of my kids, right?
Yes.
So bringing it back to thinking about what has been the constant in the experience, it is those core values that you're expressing. This that relationship is important, that caring about what we do and being interested is important, and that we want to create conditions in which interest and care can occur. You said, what gives our kids a sense of purpose? Okay, that is a constant. That is a consistent core value in an unpredictable world.
And something that we can appreciate as home educators that might go overlooked sometimes in the school system that is so oriented towards preparing kids for careers is that some kids want to build a life, and the job part of that life is not important to them at all. I remember when I went to surf camp and I was 50 years old, I went to Mexico, and my surf instructor was in her early 30s. She had gone to college. She had started out with a more traditional job in a building, but all she really wanted to do was go surfing. And so what she figured out is that she could do gig work for 6 months of the year and then surf anywhere she wanted in the world for the other 6 months. And that's how she became a surf instructor. She started finding out that you could also earn a little money while you were surfing during those 6 months. So her gig work was like hanging Christmas lights on houses, mulching yards in the spring. Like, she had a whole system of things she did. Now, she was in her 30s. She wasn't married, wasn't planning to have kids at that point. But it really struck me that she gave up what looked like a decent career to actually pursue a life. And the money side of her life was in service of that bigger vision.
I love that story. I lit up when you started telling it because you reminded me of an amazing conversation with my daughter, Erin, when she was 13. She's my second oldest. And she said, Mom, listen, I need to tell you, I know that parents always have big dreams for their children. But what I want is to get a job that I'm done with at 5 o'clock so I can go home. I want an apartment and a cat, and I want to be able to play games and write for fun. That's what she said, write for fun. And I said, that feels really achievable. And you know what? That is the path that she took. She got a job during college, and her path in college was she did 2 years of community college to do the gen ed classes in a transfers finish free program. She transferred to a state school and got her BS and did not pay a dime for her education. And she kept that job all through college, and they hired her full time the week after graduation. And that is the life that she built for herself. It was such a great moment for me, that conversation with her, because it did sort of reframe for me, like, what is the goal of this big lifelong project we're doing called Growing Up?
That's right. And, each of your kids will answer that question differently at different stages of their lives, right? And they need sometimes opportunities to struggle in order to identify what they need and what they want to do. I have someone in my life, I don't want to name names or even identify relationships, but an extended family member actually went to homeschool early and then to a boarding school because he was so advanced. And it was sort of this college experience for high school kids, right? And he ended up in a PhD program by the time he was 20, totally burned him out. Today, he owns a coffee shop, and his energy is spent traveling to South America, working with fair trade farmers and doing coffee. Has nothing to do, his PhD was like public policy. I think sometimes because we are home educators, we've been trained to believe that the academics that we're giving them are supreme. And one of the opportunities, which we've learned by working with Blake Bowles and some of his wonderful books and the Teenage Liberation Handbook, is that we are actually wanting to raise people who can build lives. And so here we are facing this AI revolution where some of the traditional employment feels like it's being co-opted. Maybe even some of the kinds of jobs that we would be most likely to prepare our kids to take, whether that's management, coding, networking, internet networking, like these jobs, when really, if we have curious, self-teaching, purpose-driven human beings, they have the opportunity to move with that current. And here's what was really hitting me this week at my age, at 64, with all my kids almost all in their 30s now. I don't have control. That job that I did, the jury is my kids. My job isn't to defend what I did. It's not to explain why what I did felt right at the time and maybe wasn't now. It is to stay present to those values, to keep helping my child see the purpose they want for themselves, to support them in their ability to self-teach, and to create a life that includes love. That's it.
That's powerful. It's sobering, Julie, because I think when they're little, our love for them is so immense and our hopes for them are so big and meaningful that we do think. I mean, I remember when mine were little and I would sometimes agonize over the tiniest decision, feeling like it was a domino that would tip things in a certain direction for the rest of their lives.
Yes.
Right? Like I feel like every parent of an infant grapples with that when it comes to, sleeping and feeding and
right.
All those early decisions felt so weighted, so fraught. So naturally, what did we do? We signed up to be involved in all of those decisions. What math curriculum are we going to use?
Totally.
And what you're expressing is that there comes a point for all of us sooner or later where we have to recognize that one way or the other, we made choices that did affect some outcomes. And we have to be accountable to the possibility that, things didn't go as well as we had hoped in certain areas. But also that so much of this whole nefarious or nebulous concept called outcome is out of everybody's control.
That's so true. I've had conversations with countless adult kids who were homeschooled, and I've had conversations with my peer group who did the homeschooling. And there tends to be this interesting dynamic that occurs. For the young adults who might be floundering, reconsidering, thinking of different ideas, maybe even wishing they had been in school instead of homeschooled, right? Like whatever is going on with them, their redefinition of values, their rejection of core tenets, like that's all going on. And then you have a fully lived adult life in the parent who to hold space for the idea that something they chose with so much care and intention might have had harmful effects feels like an invalidation of the only life you've ever been given, right? If I chose to invest in this home education, and it took me 20 years of my adult life, which is a big percentage of my good adult years, and someone comes back and says, I wish I'd gone to school. That is a crisis for a lot of parent and adult kids.
It is. Even though we know if we turn the lens around and think of it in terms of us as, say, young parents making decisions that were different from those that our parents made. My decision to breastfeed my kids was in no way a repudiation of my mother's bottle feeding, right? She lived when she lived. She made choices that made sense to her in the context of her life. I made a different choice, but it wasn't a criticism of her choice. It was an informed decision based on information that I had. So I can see and my mother never, I don't want to imply that my mother was at all sensitive about that choice that I made, but I do know that there were people, right? I know I had friends whose mothers took it very personally as a rejection or a criticism.
Well, and sometimes we have to allow for the fact that there is criticism in it, right? So if one of these adult children tells you, hey, I just look back on homeschooling and I wish I'd been in school. I feel like I missed out on these things. I've shared before, Jacob went through a moment like that. That is a moment as the adult we have to do two things, and I think simultaneously, and they're difficult. One is to validate the depth of our commitment, our persistence, our joy in having made the decision that enriched our own adult life and created the kind of family dynamic we were aiming for, right? This close, cozy home learning environment. We have to hold that separately from the effect of how that's interpreted by the child. And that's where it gets tricky, because we do need to honor that child's right to say back to us their own experience. Ditch the desk and rediscover the joy of science. Is your spring homeschool routine feeling a little stale? When the sun starts shining and the warm weather is drawing you outdoors, it's the perfect time to pivot, to lean into unit studies, and to breathe new life into your homeschool day. Brave Writer has a free guide called a Build a Science Unit Study with Brave Writer, and it shows you how to turn your child's natural wonder into an engaging learning adventure that combines subjects for both ease and delight. Imagine checking off those end-of-the-year boxes and knowing you've covered science in a meaningful way. Head over to the show notes where we've got a link for you so that you can download a free copy of our Brave Writer Build a Science Unit Study that is just perfect for spring. And now, back to the show.
Okay, I think this is a really important point. And I think it can be difficult on a couple of levels where, first of all, if the child's experience or recollection of the experience doesn't align with yours, you have to be able to exist with that discrepancy of experience. I think, and the corollary to that is, I do think sometimes it's possible for us to kind of ask the question as if we're open to the answer, like, is there anything you wish I had done differently? Do you wish I had put you in school? And you have to be really careful that you are not asking that with a particular answer that you're hoping to receive, because it is not their job to make you feel good.
That's correct. In fact, I would go further. When we started this conversation, we talked about how do you know that you've been successful as a parent? The only way to use that word success is if you are able to continue to have those meaningful communications with your kids. That's the only metric that even matters. So if your child feels safe enough to even bring up their displeasure,
right,
to say, you know, I'm not coming home for this dinner because I don't like how you're going to talk about X with my girlfriend. You know, if that's going on,
right.
It is your responsibility to actually hold that information. It doesn't necessarily have to invalidate, but your experience and somebody else's are never identical. One of the things that I learned recently, I was a moderator for a panel of adult children who had been homeschooled, and they were from a very conservative Christian brand of homeschooling, and they had a lot of thoughts. They were able to say very positive things about their mothers. It was kind of cool, but they also had a lot of thoughts about the mixture of sort of doctrine and education and the way all of that worked. And one of the takeaways that I got from listening to these lovely young women who were in their 30s and one was in her 40s was that the values and beliefs that an adult is able to interpret and process as meaningful to them do not have the same impact on a small child. Small child does not have context, life experience, the ability to know that they're hearing a belief. They just hear it as fact or as true. And for some kids, that creates a kind of experience that's really unnerving, alarming. So here you are in your adulthood hearing a certain perspective that you've adopted as a belief, and you're saying it to a 5-year-old who has no frame of reference for how to hold that belief in a way that isn't self-harming. This happens in education all the time, where you're like, I believe chemistry. I did this to my own child. I believe chemistry is so important. You have to do it. You won't get into college without it. And I created stress in our relationship over a belief that college was more important than my son's self-knowing. That was a problem, and we had to repair it. And weirdly, he turned out to be right and got into college without it. And so here I had been prophesying doom and scripting what I thought was for his best interest. And I had to, with regret, hear the impact of that behavior on him as a developing teen. That's an important moment. I can't just keep saying, well, the belief that chemistry was essential is all I knew and it shouldn't have bothered you. Well, it did bother him. That's where we are.
Okay. In thinking about how to grapple with that set of circumstances,
yes,
it strikes me that we're seeing a lot nowadays of what I see almost as a sense of relief that I'm seeing it a lot in like middle-aged adult women who find out that they have ADHD, inattentive type.
Okay.
And they're like, oh my gosh, all these things that I have been beating myself up for about my behavior for my whole life, it turns out that there's a reason for it, a diagnosis that explains it. And I think a lot of us, as we participate in that discourse, we can understand, right? We can say, oh, right, like there was a point in time when left-handed children were punished and penalized. And
Yes.
Isn't it great that no longer is that happening? We now understand something different about the physiology.
Yes.
And if we can apply that type of thinking to the situations that you're like, the context, we have more knowledge, we understand better. Your chemistry example, like you were operating within a context with
That's right.
the set of knowledge that you have, and time moved on and shook your certainty about that.
That's right. And I had to come to that realization that my best intentions did not prevent a harmful impact.
Right. And that you have to accept, I made it the best choice that I could make with the information that I had. And now I have more information. This is part of the whole critical thinking process, right? Now I need to sit with and evaluate. I'm listening to somebody else tell me that maybe my assumptions were not correct. I do think that's a hard thing for parents to do, and especially for parents who have taken upon themselves this role of like special intensified focus on educating our kids. Does that make sense, Julie?
I mean, it does to me. I hope it's making sense to our listeners, but it's partly because of the place we're in. So we're sort of giving you like a peek into the future, right? I wish someone had told me. I wrote a little post on Threads this morning just saying, everyone taught me how to do beginnings, how to cast vision for the future. No one has taught me how to handle endings. Like my brunette hair is now gray. Like I have a lot of face wrinkles. Like my eyesight is not what it used to be. These are not things I was prepared to understand. And honestly, it's true with things like homeschooling and being the most important influence on your child's life. Just because your children get older doesn't mean that you are prepared to be less essential to them. In fact, you've cultivated a habit for 20 plus years of being essential to your children. And when they move on, it's shocking. And when they come back and they say things like, I don't need you at X event, it's shocking. You can't imagine not being essential. These are endings. And I was at a really interesting retreat last week in Tucson. And one of the thoughts that just kept washing over me while I was there was that living in reality means accepting the complexity of both your wishes, your dreams, and how they fell short. I know this sounds so obvious, but it doesn't feel comfortable or obvious when it's happening. It's like, I read that on an Instagram post. And then your child comes to you and says, Mom, this really bothered me, or I didn't want this in my life. That is not a moment where you're like, oh, acceptance. That's not the first reaction.
Right.
The first reaction is defensiveness and how can I fix it in this moment so we can return to that comfortable relationship I used to know, which is I'm essential to you.
It is a really challenging tightrope, I think, for a human being, because when they exhibit the exact traits that you've wanted to cultivate in them all along, agency, independence,
Yeah.
thinking things through on their own, right?
Right.
it does mean, I mean, there's that saying about like the job of a parent is to put yourself out of a job.
Yes.
But that's only a kind of intellectualizing of the role because your heart doesn't interpret.
Well, no. And so part of what was occurring to me last week is the endings all kind of come at the same time. So here, your whole future is being planned. You're thinking about vacations you'll take, graduations you'll attend, weddings and bridal showers and grandchildren. You're thinking about the years of retirement, like, okay, I've got to sock away the money now in my 40s. So when I'm in my 60s or 70s, we will actually be retired. But no one prepares you for the feeling of that sort of loss of purpose that comes after those things are actually complete and you're living in the reality of them being behind you. And so one of the ways I think women in my age group sometimes cope is by trying to recreate the need, the essentialness of their role, whether it's through grandparenting or being really invested in what their adult kids are doing or making sure that they, get dinner every week with one of their kids. And part of what we are preparing them for when we're homeschooling is the opportunity to do the very thing we did, make our own decisions, be controversial if they want to, create the culture and community experience of family that works for them, not the one that you think works for you, and also supporting them when they're facing an entirely different landscape of what it means to be an adult than the one we were in when we had them. Because, hello, 20, 30 years is a big, long difference.
And things change fast these days.
Oh, so fast.
The world that we're preparing them for when they're little, I think you said this to me recently, that it doesn't exist yet. And that when we arrive at it, it's a whole different world.
It's not the world we pictured. I pulled out my Nora Ephron mega book. This is called The Most of Nora Ephron. It's all of her writings. And for those who don't know her by name, she wrote You've Got Mail, Sleepless in Seattle, all of our When Harry Met Sally, all of our favorites rom-coms. But she died of cancer. And near the end of her life, she was sort of sizing up how many more things did she need to learn before she died? And which things could she just let go? And I'll just never forget when she said, at this moment, some of the things I'm refusing to know anything about include the former Soviet republics, the Kardashians, Twitter, all housewives, survivors, American Idols and Bachelors, soccer, monkfish, Jay-Z, every drink invented since the Cosmopolitan, especially the drink made with the crushed mint leaves. You know the one. And then she says, I'm going to Google the name of that drink. Be right back. The mojito.
The best drink, by the way.
Yeah. And then she says, I am living in the Google years. No question of that. And there are advantages to it. Right. And she goes back and talks about it. But ultimately, she made a decision at 69 to say, enough. There's a world that is moving past me. And that world will continue without me, and it will continue with our children. I'm not quite at the point where I don't want to know things because I don't have a death sentence yet hanging over my head. But I also am highly aware that there are some things I will never get back. And it's really interesting to be in that moment and know, oh, I have run my last race. I am no longer as flexible in my body as I once was. I do run out of energy sooner than I used to. Lifting my grandkids up and down, got to be careful, right? Like those are just body things, but it extends beyond that. I've already done my education. I'm probably not going back to a grad school again, right?
Right. Years ago, when my oldest was a teen, I think it was, my husband came across something somewhere that said, one day you picked up your child for the last time and you didn't know it. And boy, did that cut Scott to the core. And every year to this day, he's like, who can I pick up? And it's this game. And I'm in the background going, honey, you're back. Put him down.
But how true. How true.
You don't know. I remember once, we had our last Christmas in the house we lived in Virginia. And I didn't know at the time that that was our last Christmas in that house. Of course, that is the experience of being human. Things end, but you don't get advance notice of most of the endings.
And the problem is when you're in your 30s and 40s, especially, there's still a very long runway in front of you. So it feels like you can keep making pivots, switching things up. There's a certain point at which you're like, oh, yeah, you know what? My kids did not go to school. Like this is no longer us navigating should they or shouldn't they go. You're just like, you know what? They really didn't. And it struck me the other day. I was like, I have so many school memories that are coming back to me right now. And I think it's just age. You start remembering your childhood with certain fondness or certain clarity. And I was like, my kids have no childhood school memories. They have them with me. That is so bizarre. But while I was living it, it seemed as normal as it could possibly be. And I obviously believe in homeschooling. I'm not saying not to do it on that basis.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, some of these become irrevocable. And so part of this journey of humaning, womaning, mothering, adulting is to recognize that we make decisions that have consequences both on ourselves and our children that are irrevocable. And our experience of those choices will be necessarily different than our kids. And sometimes they'll be like, thank God you homeschooled me for X, Y, and Z. And other times they'll say, you know, it felt pretty toxic when you did X, Y, and Z. Just like they might say about a school teacher, just what you said, Melissa. And it's really our role as parents to navigate that ending of the fantasy. The fantasy was it's all going to turn out great. And then the ending, the reality is, it will be like raisin bread. There will be raisins in the bread. And you need to sit with it and chew those raisins and not reject your adult children's own description of their lives. That is your chance to really hear them.
To allow them to tell their own stories without attempting to always correct the transcript.
That's right.
And to actually them. You know, this is making me think a lot about those early days when my oldest, she was our only at the time, and she was not quite 2 years old when she was diagnosed with cancer. Up to that point, what kind of mother was I? I was so crunchy, Julie. We were a no refined sugar family, like to the nth degree. And then suddenly she has cancer. And we're about a week into the hospital, and the social worker who was assigned to, you know, all the kids in pediatric oncology walks in, and I am face first in a box of Dunkin' Donuts. And she said, oh, right on schedule. And by then, you know, like she had already started chemo. We wanted her to eat anything. There were days what she ate was a spoonful of ketchup and some nacho cheese Doritos. I can still remember the smell of Doritos coming out of her skin.
Wow.
And it really made me aware, and I was pretty young myself then, mid-20s, right? That, oh, I was trying really hard to like create ideal circumstances. And this is out of my control. And all I can do right now is attempt to make the moments that we have together as joyful under the circumstances as possible. That's what I leaned all the way in on. And I can say that that is the one thing that I do feel like I was really consistent at. And if I were to make some kind of success metric, which I feel is impossible for the same reasons you do, it would be, did we have fun together?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We did. In adverse circumstances, in good circumstances, we had fun together and we learned stuff.
Mic drop right there. I mean, honestly, the pleasure of living is what we're after. There's only this one time. And it's going in forward motion, and you won't get those years back. My niece is getting married, and she sent me a photograph of me holding her when she was a newborn that she had that I had never seen. I was in my mid-30s. I look 12, by the way. I saw this picture and I'm like,
right?
Who is that child holding that baby? Like that was shocking. And of course, I have no memory of holding her, of that event, who took the picture. I know nothing about it. But all I could think was, oh, I'm so glad that my niece has a photo of me holding her with so much joy and love in my heart, because that is how I feel about babies. And she has evidence of that. I think for us in this like journey of life with our families, you won't remember all the moments. Your kids won't remember all the moments. But like we always say, people do remember how someone made them feel. And that's what you have control over. Your opportunity to create a space where your child's experience of living matters to you more than obedience,
Right.
more than getting good grades or studying certain academics or becoming a fabulous piano player. Your best opportunity for creating a lifelong learner and a family that wants to hang out is ensuring that your child's experience of their own life is something they find happy, something they're glad they're living, right?
Yes.
That
yes.
will cover a multitude of sins, honestly.
That's right. They sit around the table together and they tell stories and they are laughing so
Yes.
hard at their stories.
Yes.
And in some of those stories, I don't come off so great.
No
and that's
kidding.
part of the fun for them.
I mean, 100% true. And the inside jokes, right, that the family has created over 20 years of all living in the same house all day, every day.
Right.
Those are the things that we don't prioritize. And yet they really are the essence of a great homeschool. I'm reminded of the fact that a friend of mine has a daughter who is an intern with the Cincinnati Ballet. So I've had opportunities to go multiple times this year, which has been just incredible.
Oh, cool.
So recently, yes, I took my granddaughter and my oldest son to see the Pinocchio Ballet. And I'm having that thing that happens to you when you're a grandma. I'm remembering when I took my son, Noah, when he was little to the theater. And now I have his child with him at the theater. And this feels very meaningful and important to me. So I'm being very sentimentally emotional. We go, we sit down. And there are whole sequences of dance that are very slow and not interesting to a 6-year-old. And so Lavender's bouncing on the chair and she wants to get up and use the bathroom. And I have in my mind this picture of what this is supposed to feel like versus what's actually happening. But her dad was the same way. And of course, as a grandma, I just leaned into it. And when it was over, she said she had a great time. And I thought, that's all that I care about.
Right.
I just want her to look back and go, Grandma took me to the ballet. I don't care if she sat through it and even noticed they were dancing.
I love that. And it speaks to how much it matters to bring that focus back to those core values that you were talking about. Like, this is a moment to live together, to enjoy, to celebrate, to savor what is here to be savored because we're experiencing it together and we're learning something.
That's it.
And I would say if your children are little or really whatever age, adding the element of writing down the funny things that they say.
Oh my gosh.
Because those will, Julie, you talked about those in-jokes.
Oh yeah.
My family loves to go back and retell those stories. Or my husband will find some, kid quip that he put on Facebook 15 years ago.
Oh my gosh, totally.
You would never remember it.
No.
You would never have remembered it. So capture those things. And when you look at them, they also help steep you in, oh, right, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing this.
It's a great life. I loved homeschooling and I love what it created among us, even when we made mistakes.
Right. Well, because what are we always saying? You learn better from mistakes.
That's right. And a love of learning includes that journey. It's not just performance. It's becoming, like we always say, becoming connected to the science of relations, how everything fits together.
Right. Because the reality is there was never some set of dominoes that I could perfectly align that would all fall over in exactly the right pattern for some perfect outcome. What I had was a whole bunch of roly-polies that were going to wander off in unpredictable directions.
So completely true. Also, your relationship with your kids doesn't end when they're done with college.
Right.
Like there are new ways that you will engage with them. And the 20s, I think, can be kind of challenging because they're figuring it out and they need their space and you're figuring out how to let go. But as they age, you keep reorganizing those relationships. And so the main message I just want to leave with is stay open to the feedback from your children.
Right.
Do not treat their feedback as an attack or as an invalidation of your parenting, or even as a scorecard on your success as a parent. That's not what it is. It's them asking, can you hold love and space for me even when I have this perspective?
Right.
And that is the true test for us.
At my stage of life with my youngest, 17, this was a conversation that was good for me.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm glad you brought it up. I was thinking about it all week. So this has been great. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And we look forward to meeting with you again next week on our usual update day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Okay, that's another Brave Writer episode in the books. Thanks for joining Melissa and me today. We love it when you leave us reviews, when you send us comments via text message. We read them all. We also couldn't do this show without our fabulous production team at Nova or Jeanette Hall, the Brave Writer team member who handles all those administrative details you know nothing about. In the meantime, we hope that you have a fantastic week. Keep going, think well. We're rooting for you.